The memory faded to darkness as Macy waited for the next memory to fade in. She began to run through everything she had witnessed. How far back in time were these memories? Time. Her thoughts drifted to the very reason she was witnessing all of these memories. The way she understood it, according to Nima, she was unconscious. Maybe Nima could help her make sense of things. Nima, the ghost-like avatar, appeared beside her. Yes, Doctor? Have you learned anything else about these memories and where they're coming from? Nima floated around the front side of Macy. I'm sorry, Doctor. Nothing has changed except integration progress is at 50%. I see. By the way, why hasn't the next memory started? The simulation has been running for 360 seconds, Doctor. The avatar pointed behind Macy as she swung around to find in the distance the great pyramids glowing a brilliant, fiery yellow, as if the sun was reflecting off its flat surface. She realized it was the fires that lit up the settlements below that was providing the light for the pyramids. There was no sky above that she could see, not a single star, only black clouds. Nima's voice filled her mind once more. Dr. Jensen, I would like to inform you that I have successfully finished writing a new application within the Cephalon. You can now move freely throughout the simulation within seconds just by thinking of your destination. However, the safety protocols have been disabled in order for the application to function properly. Do be careful. Noted. I guess there's no better time to try it out. She closed her eyes and thought of the aqueduct where Marduk and Dagon had their conversation about the upcoming war. In an instant, she felt her body being pulled through space and time as she arrived at the very spot she pictured in her mind. Macy opened her eyes to find the city below her filled with armored infantry that lined the corridors and passageways. The fires from the city torches reflected off their ornately crafted skin, adding to the brilliant light already emitting off the pyramid. Then she heard a familiar roar that came from the opposite side of the settlement. The doctor found Kronos, Rhea, and Dagon at the city's edge. Each beast looked anxious, ready for the coming confrontation. Then Marduk's armored figure caught her attention. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she found herself on the aqueduct on the other side of the city. Marduk's voice caught her attention as she watched the dimly lit giants hold their position outside the aqueduct that circled the pyramids and the surrounding structures. Fear not. Gojira is resting peacefully within, guarded by my greatest Nephilim warriors. No harm shall befall our future king. Kronos and Dagon stood vigilant, their heads darting in different directions as they scanned the darkness. Rhea turned and looked back at the Anunnaki and Macy. Upon closer inspection, the doctor realized that she wasn't looking at them, but at the buildings behind her. Macy's heart sank as Kronos pushed his face into Rhea's side, reassuring her as best he could. Then, in unison, all three behemoths snapped to attention, each one on high alert. Now it begins. Macy's heart jumped when she heard the cry of a creature in the distance. The ground began to shake, throwing Macy and Marduk off balance. A large, illuminated crystal burst out of the ground to the side of Dagon, knocking the beast into its mother. Another crystal sprang up from the earth, this time within the perimeter of the aqueduct, causing the stone structure to crumble and fall as they were pushed out of the way. More and more crystals exploded from beneath the earth, inside and outside the settlement's boundaries. Macy looked back at the family of giants in time to see more crystals popping up in the distance. Their glow lit up the battlefield, and that's when she saw it. The beast who the roar belonged to was massive, with huge crystals protruding out of its shoulders and down its backside. At first glance, the creature looked menacing, but there was a familiarity about it. Her suspicions were confirmed when Marduk spoke once more, although she didn't turn her gaze from the monstrosity headed straight for them. This is one of Enlil's creations, a mere copy of the original. I wonder how it's been modified. Macy realized Thoth was standing on the other side of Marduk, observing the ensuing conflict as well. Kronos' ear-shattering roar pulled Macy's attention back to the family of giants. The trio shuffled and stomped the ground as they sized up the intruder. Macy realized how oddly similar its face was to Kronos', save for the pulsating orange crystal above its brow line.
My lord, what do I call it for the record?
The bestial cry of the new abomination echoed across the sky as Kronos, Rhea, and Dagon charged into battle. Macy watched as the crystals shot bolts of energy into the crystals protruding from the abomination's body. Rhea and Dagon pulled away from Kronos, whose maple leaf-like dorsal plates began to glow a brilliant blue as he let loose his atomic blast at his foe. Macy heard Marduk gasp as the blast ricocheted off the air in front of the behemoth and blasted massive holes in random areas of the jungle canopy below. Dagon, the faster of him and his mother, reached the beast first as he leapt into the air, arms forward and mouth open wide. To Macy's shock, he stopped meters away from his target, suspended in mid-air.
Impossible.
No, Nefarious. That is what it is. Dagon chirped as it was violently thrown into its mother, causing both to go crashing to the ground. The beast seemed to chuckle at the two entwined giants as they struggled to their feet. Kronos roared as he charged his doppelganger, his dorsal plates flashing in a brilliant threat display. Nefarious returned the gesture as the crystals on its body began to flash, as they absorbed the energy from the surrounding crystals it had caused to appear. A golden orange beam shot from its mouth at Kronos. The behemoth dodged the attack, continuing its charge, when the observers on the aqueduct watched as the beam arced downwards and blasted Kronos in the leg. The old one stumbled and crashed into the ground, crying out in pain as it rolled to a stop from its own inertia. A blast from the now recovered Dagon slammed into the chest of the abomination as it cried out in pain. Rhea joined her son with an atomic blast of her own, but this time Nefarious brought up its psychic wall to deflect the beam of radioactive energy. Fragments of the beam landed back at its owner's feet, while others made it as far back as the settlement, destroying more of its buildings. A cry from within caught Macy's attention. She scanned the debris to find Gojira pulling itself out of a pile of rubble. It seemed injured to the doctor, his cries of pain being a good indicator. They were loud enough to also catch the attention of Rhea, who cried out and began to run back to the aqueduct's perimeter. Suddenly, She was lifted into the air, kicking and roaring. Against her will, she was pulled through the air back towards her mate's clone as she was dropped unexpectedly to the jungle below. Macy looked to find Nefarious's neck between Kronos' jaws. The Old One pulled down on the creature's thick neck, attempting to pin it to the ground. The crystals flashed again as another golden beam left its mouth and circled around the back of its neck, blasting Kronos in the eye, causing the Titan to release its grip. In the commotion, Dagon had positioned itself behind the beast and was now pouncing on its prey, causing all three giants to come crashing down on top of each other. Enlil, what have you done?
The creature seems to possess abilities of the mind, and it seems to be drawing power from those crystals. For such a creature to be a product of the gods' engineering, I truly cannot comprehend. Fascinating.
The trio's attention was pulled away from the battle when a familiar cry pierced the ambient noise of the burning structure. The philologist watched as the Queen of Monsters dove down to where Gojira was still trying to pull itself from the rubble. Mothra used her insect-like appendages to pull the juvenile from the wreckage and place him safely in a small clearing. Nefarious' cry pulled her attention back to the battlefield, where she watched Dagon slam into Kronos, sending both creatures to the ground. Macy noticed the look of satisfaction on the abomination's face when Rhea appeared from behind. She leapt onto the creature's back, using her weight to bring the clone crashing headfirst into the jungle beneath. She bit down on one of the crystals that lined its backside, pulling away after realizing it wouldn't crack. Utilizing her massive strength, she slowly pulled the unconscious beast onto its back, exposing the softer flesh of the creature's front side. Then she stiffened, seemingly turned into a monolithic statue. Then Macy watched as Nefarious lifted itself off the ground and back onto its feet without moving. A gust of cool air almost knocked the doctor off her feet as Mothra flew overhead straight towards the intruder. The Queen of the Monsters' wings shifted color between blue and red as she dove in for an attack, stinger unsheathed and pointed at the clone. Macy noticed the surprised look on Nefarious' face when Mothra slammed into its upper body and drove her stinger deep into the ribs of the creature. I see now. Its greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. I know what must be done. Macy watched as his helmet materialized from his upper armor in the form of a falcon's head. Ornate golden wings materialized from the backside of his armor as well, and in a breath later, Marduk had taken to the sky headed for Dagon. Mothra's cry pulled her attention back to the battle as she watched massive crystals launch themselves into the air on a collision course with the divine being. She banked and dove at the creature with all of her appendages forward when an atomic blast slammed into one of the massive shoulder crystals, causing it to explode into smaller fragments. Nefarious cried out in pain as Mothra changed course just before impact and headed over to where Rhea was still paralyzed. The abomination looked in the direction of the blast's source to find Dagon staring him down. Kronos roared a majestic cry at his doppelganger, who replied in kind. Both father and son's dorsal plates flickered and glowed as they released their beams in unison, The psychic wall made quick work of the blasts as Nefarious shot back its own golden orange beam, which curved in arc straight towards Dagon. Another atomic blast made contact with the undamaged shoulder crystal, causing it to instantly erupt into pieces. The abomination turned around to face Rhea, who was surrounded by a glowing mist that reflected the light of the fires and crystals that littered the battlefield. She charged her foe, only to be swept off her feet by the beast's long crystal-tipped tail. Nefarious stood over the subdued titaness, the tips of its tail poised for the kill. The crystals pierced deep into the side of Kronos, who threw himself on top of his mate just before the blow struck home. The beast triumphantly roared as Macy's heart sank into her stomach. She watched as Mothra assaulted the abomination, while Rhea pulled herself out from under the fatally wounded Kronos. She bent down to his head as the two exchanged a moment. Macy could only guess what they were communicating with each other. But after that moment, Rhea stood up and glared at Nefarious. Macy could see the rage in her face as she closed the distance between herself and the others. The clone snapped at the queen of the monsters, who was assaulting its head while it gripped Dagon's throat with its tail, preventing the younger titan from attacking its legs. Now Rhea was on them as she swiftly caught the abomination by the soft spot under its maw and her mouth, and ripped the flesh away as if a samurai had just sliced the neck of his opponent. Blood poured out from the wound as the beast struggled to breathe. Its eyes rolled back in its head, and a moment later, it fell lifeless to the ground. Macy's attention was pulled down below the aqueduct as she watched the juvenile Gojira dart towards his family, who were now huddled around the wounded Kronos. Tears came to the doctor's eyes as she listened to the low moans and growls of Dagon and Rhea. Gojira broke through the trees surrounding the titans as he made his way to his father's head. But when he got there, all he found was his father's lifeless eyes staring at him. He slowly approached, trying to understand what was happening. He pushed his muzzle into the side of his father's face, hoping to draw out a reaction. Nothing. Again he tried, and again nothing. He looked up at his mother and brother, who both had depressingly sad looks strewn across their faces. He looked back at his father's lifeless eyes and roared as loud as he could. He pushed his body against his father's skin and cried out once more. This time the others followed suit. Mothra cried out as well, as her wings began to glow into a blinding light as the memory faded into darkness.